Hello everyone, welcome back to the Alabama Woodworker. My name is Hui. In this video, I build the arched rails that join the lower section of the leg assembly. Let me show you my SketchUp drawing so I can better explain to you what it is that I'll be building.
The main focus of this video is the bent lamination that joins the lower section of the leg assembly. I call them the arched rails. Bent form lamination is a method of making curved pieces by gluing thin strips of wood together and then pressing them together over a form or mold as the glue cures. One method of holding the strips of wood to the mold is to use clamps, lots of clamps. Another method is vacuum bagging. I'm going to be using a vacuum bag because it creates even constant pressure over the form. From the top view, the arched rails have an inside radius of 20 inches with an outside radius of 20 7/8 of an inch, with a span of 24 1/4 of an inch. This means the arched rails should have a thickness of 7/8 of an inch. However, I ended up with my rails being 13/16 of an inch thick. The bent lamination mold that I'll make out of MDF will have a radius of 19 7/8 of an inch. Bent laminations tend to want to relax or spring back after they are removed from their forms. I'm estimating a total of 1/8 of an inch of spring back on each side. From the side view, the arched rails are 2 3/4 of an inch wide and will be joined to the legs starting 10.5 inches from the bottom of the legs. The stretcher will be joined to the arched rails at a later point, so I'll discuss that in a later video. I used 6 by 40 millimeter dominoes to join the arched rails to the legs. The location of the center of the dominoes on the arched rails were offset vertically by 3/4 of an inch from the top and bottom of the arched rails, and 3/8 of an inch in from the back edge of the arched rails. The domino bit was plunged only 15 millimeters to ensure I didn't punch through the face of the arched rails. Finally, the location of the center of the dominoes on the table legs were offset 3/4 of an inch just like the arched rails, but starting at a vertical location 10.5 inches from the bottom of the legs and 7/8 of an inch in from the back of the legs to give a 1/2 inch reveal once everything was joined together. In this case, the domino bit was plunged 25 millimeters into the leg. Okay, let's get back to the shop.
I created a full-scale drawing of my arched rails and table legs for 3 reasons. First, I wanted to get the measurements needed to make my master template. Second, I wanted to get the arc length for my lamination strips. And lastly, and probably the most important aspect of this, I wanted to lay out the joinery specifically to make sure that my domino beach tenons that'll be joining the arched rails to the table legs don't punch through the arched rails themselves. I'll be making a master template out of 3/4 inch MDF at a radius of 19 7/8 of an inch to account for springback, which I discussed earlier in this video. Once I make the master template, I'll be making 9 copies to create my bending form totaling 6 3/4 of an inch. My lamination will be about 6 inches wide, and I'll break that down into 2.5 inch wide arched rails. To true up the radius of this template, I'm going to be using my router alongside of the Milescraft Circle Guide Kit. Now this guide kit is something that I recently got because it claims to be an extremely precise and accurate circle cutting guide kit. So the key to this is this centering pin and this turn lock base plate. What you do is you have to ensure that the base plate is perfectly concentric with your router. And you stick that centering pin in there and you loosely attach the base plate onto your router. And there are a whole bunch of different slots for different routers, and it's pretty universal. And then you lock down your plunge router so that it's hitting the centering pin. And then you tighten down the base plate. I roughed out the pieces for my mold using the jigsaw. Now I'm going to attach each individual piece to my master template and truing up the edge with my pattern routing bit. Eventually I will have built up the entire mold. I face jointed and edge jointed the boards that will make up the arched rails. I'll then resaw these boards using my bandsaw and then resurface the faces using my jointer. I'll repeat this process and each of the subsequent lamination strips will be stacked on top of each other. I resawed all the lamination strips on the bandsaw and I'm really happy with what I came out with. I'm going to run all the pieces through the drum sander to remove the bandsaw marks and also to get them to uniform, even thickness. I've rehearsed the glue up and vacuum bagging process twice now, and I believe I've got a system figured out. First, using Unibond 1 as my adhesive, I'll spread the glue on a single face of each of the lamination strips. Each subsequent strip will be stacked on top of each other. Once that's complete, I'll line up the edge and place blue painter's tape over that edge. That will ensure that the bundle doesn't shift as I'm maneuvering it over top of the mold. I'm going to assist the bundle lamination strips to contour to the mold by wrapping it with stretch wrap. I'll then take that entire assembly and place it into the vacuum bag. Once in the vacuum bag, I'll take this fiberglass screen mesh, place it over top of the bundle and the mold. The fiberglass mesh ensures that the air properly evacuates around the mold and the lamination bundle. I'll then take an electric blanket and place it over top of the vacuum bag and let that sit overnight. Next, I'm going to take my bent lamination, running it across the joiner fence, and get the edge of the bent lamination square. I'll then run it through my table saw to get a width of 2.5 inches for 2 rails. I forgot to hit the record button as I was cross-cutting the arched rails to their appropriate arc length, but the operation is quite simple. What I did was I attached the mold to my miter saw fence. This ensured that the arched rails would be square to the miter saw fence as I made that cross-cut. I'll be using a 6 by 40 millimeter domino to connect the rails to the table legs. I'll be plunging 15 millimeters into the rails to ensure that I don't plunge out the back of the table rails. and it'll be at a height of 18 millimeters. I'm using an 8mm shim to offset the bit, which is centered on the Festool Domino 10 millimeters from the bottom of the base plate of the Festool Domino. For the leg, I'm plunging 25 millimeters deep and centering the bit 18 millimeters from the non-tapered backside of the table leg. Therefore, I set my Festool Domino fence to 18 millimeters so that my bit will be centered on that 18 millimeter line. The arched rails took me longer to build than I anticipated. This is because bent form lamination is a new process for me, and I was learning as I was constructing the arched rails. One aspect of this build that I'm particularly proud of is how close the final product came out to the full-size template. I still have the apron, stretcher, and cross rails to construct before the base is complete. One last thing I want to mention is my personal shop safety. I used the table saw to cut the arched rails to final width because I felt confident and safe. I rehearsed the cut multiple times prior to even raising the table saw blade. While I own a saw stop, I never want to activate the brake due to a lapse in judgment. I made sure I had proper guide and feed mechanisms to maintain pressure against the table saw fence and top. If you ever feel unsafe about tool operation, you should listen to your intuition and not go forward. If you have questions or comments, leave them below. If you like what you saw, hit the like button, or hit the subscribe button, or hit both. You can also follow me on Instagram at Alabama Woodworker to get the day-to-day scoop on what's going on in the shop. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.